Wow, you guys have really sent in some fascinating stuff for us to dig into this time around. Love versus arranged marriage, what a topic, right?
Yeah, it's really incredible how this debate continues to resonate with people across so many different cultures and backgrounds.
It's clearly something that people feel very strongly about. So much passion in all your messages.
Absolutely. And as we try to unpack all these perspectives and experiences you shared, it's important to remember right from the start that this isn't about declaring one side the winner. You know, love marriage is better or arranged marriage is better.
Exactly. We're not taking sides here.
Nope, not at all. This deep dive is all about really understanding the core arguments and the realities of each approach. We want to give you a balanced view, help you make your own informed decision.
So let's start with the basics. Like, when we say love marriage, what do we actually mean? What are we talking about here?
Okay, so at its most basic, a love marriage happens when two people, they connect, they fall in love, they feel that spark, and based on those feelings, they decide to get married.
It's about that personal choice, that emotional connection.
Exactly. And the big thing is, the families aren't the main decision makers here. It's the couple themselves making that choice.
Okay, that makes sense. So then, how does arranged marriage fit into all of this? Where's the difference?
Well, in an arranged marriage, the families are much more involved right from the start. They're the ones who kind of initiate the whole process of finding a partner.
So they're looking for a good match.
Yeah, and they're considering all sorts of things like, shared background, family values, compatibility in terms of lifestyle and goals, things like that.
So it's less about that initial romantic spark and more about building a solid foundation for a marriage that can last.
That's the idea, yeah. And, it's interesting because, historically speaking, arranged marriage has been the norm in many cultures.
It's true. And it's only relatively recently, with modernization and shifting social norms, that love marriage has become so prominent.
Yeah, exactly. And that historical context is important to keep in mind as we explore the pros and cons of each.
All right, so let's start digging into some of those pros and cons, shall we? Let's talk about love marriage first. What are some of the biggest advantages of choosing your own partner?
One of the things that keeps coming up in your messages is the power of that initial connection. The romance, the passion, the feeling of really being seen and understood by someone. That's something that could be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Starting a marriage with that kind of intense feeling must feel pretty amazing.
It can be, yeah. And also, when you've had that time to date, to get to know each other before getting married, well, there are likely to be fewer surprises down the road.
Yeah, you've already seen each other's good sides and bad sides.
Exactly. You've worked through disagreements, you've supported each other through challenges, and that can build a really strong foundation for a marriage.
And let's not forget the importance of having that freedom of choice, not feeling pressured by family or society to marry someone you don't actually want to marry.
That's huge, absolutely. That sense of agency, of having control over your own destiny.
And, I'm thinking that freedom might also translate to better communication within the marriage. Like, if you've chosen this person freely, maybe you're more likely to be open and honest with them, right?
It makes sense, yeah. And that open communication can lead to stronger emotional support, too. Knowing that you've got someone who understands you on that deep level can be a real source of strength, especially when things get tough.
It's like that love, that initial spark, becomes this anchor.
Exactly. That bond can be really powerful in helping couples overcome the inevitable challenges that life throws at them.
Okay, but let's be real. Things aren't always perfect, right? Even in love marriages, things can go wrong.
Of course. And one of the risks we see is that, sometimes when we're really in love, we tend to idealize our partners a bit.
We put them on a pedestal. We don't see their flaws.
Yeah, we focus on the positive and ignore the negatives. But then, when you're married and those rose-tinted glasses come off, well, that can be a bit of a shock.
And those flaws that seemed small at first can suddenly feel a lot bigger.
That's right. And that can lead to disappointment, to conflict, and in some cases to the realization that maybe you weren't as compatible as you thought you were.
And let's not forget about the potential for family drama. If families don't approve of the marriage, that can create a whole lot of stress.
Absolutely. That lack of family support can be incredibly isolating and difficult for a couple to navigate.
We also need to consider the practical side of things. Financial pressures, career struggles, those can put a strain on any marriage, right?
Yeah, and for couples who are just starting out, who are both trying to build their careers and make ends meet, those pressures can be even more intense.
And what happens when those initial intense feelings start to fade? Because let's be honest, that initial passion doesn't always last forever.
That's a really important point. If that initial romantic love isn't nurtured and allowed to evolve into a deeper, more mature kind of love, the relationship can become vulnerable.
Like, you need to find new ways to connect, new reasons to stay together.
Yeah, you need to build a partnership that goes beyond just the initial emotional high.
Because without that, divorce becomes a real possibility.
Unfortunately, yes. If the foundation of the marriage was solely based on that initial spark, and that spark dies out, it can be hard to find other reasons to stay together.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential downsides of love marriage. Now let's flip the script and look at the potential strengths of arranged marriage. What are some of the things that might surprise people about this approach?
One of the big advantages, and one that often gets overlooked, is that you're starting off with this incredible built-in support system.
Because the families are so involved.
Exactly. Both families are invested in the success of the marriage, which means there's a whole network of people ready to offer advice, support, and practical help when needed.
So it's less about the couple going it alone.
Exactly. And, when disagreements arise, as they inevitably do in any marriage, having that wider family network can be a huge help.
People to mediate, to offer different perspectives, to prevent things from escalating.
Exactly. And the other thing that's really interesting about arranged marriage is the focus on compatibility. It's just that the criteria for compatibility are a bit different.
What do you mean by that?
Well, instead of focusing on romantic chemistry, families tend to look at things like shared values, similar backgrounds, similar goals for the future, things that can really contribute to long-term stability.
It's about building a partnership that's solid on a practical level.
Right. And because both families are so involved in the decision-making, there's this sense of shared responsibility for the success of the marriage.
Everyone's invested in making it work.
Exactly. And that can create a very strong foundation. Plus, and this is something a lot of people don't realize, many arranged marriages actually do develop into loving, romantic relationships over time.
Really?
Oh yeah. It might not start with fireworks, but as the couple gets to know each other, builds trust, shares experiences, that love can absolutely grow.
So it's more of a slow burn.
In a way, yeah. And for some people, that slow burn can actually be more fulfilling and lasting than a passionate love that fades quickly.
Okay, so it's clear that arranged marriage has its strengths, but we have to acknowledge that it has its potential downsides as well, right?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest concerns is the issue of personal choice. In some cases, individuals might feel pressured to marry someone they don't really know or have a connection with.
So there's that lack of agency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be a real problem. And if that initial spark isn't there, if there's no real attraction, it can be very difficult to build a fulfilling relationship.
And all that family involvement that we talked about earlier, that can also be a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. If families are too involved, too intrusive, it can create a lot of tension and conflict for the couple.
And it can prevent them from really establishing their own independence, their own identity as a couple.
That's right. And it's important to remember that in some cases, arranged marriages can be driven by factors that have nothing to do with love or happiness.
Like societal pressure or even financial considerations.
Exactly. And that can be very damaging. And of course, we can't talk about arranged marriage without addressing the issue of forced marriage.
Which is absolutely unacceptable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between a marriage that's arranged with the consent of both individuals and one that's forced upon someone against their will.
And we need to be really clear that forced marriage is a human rights violation and has no place in any society.
I completely agree.
Okay, so we've explored the pros and cons, the potential benefits and drawbacks of both love and arranged marriage. I guess the big question now is one inherently better than the other?
And the truth is, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. What works for one person or one couple might not work for another. It's so individual.
It's all about finding what fits your values, your personality, your circumstances.
Exactly. The most important thing is that the marriage, however it began, is built on a foundation of mutual respect, understanding, and a willingness to work through challenges together.
And what are some of the key ingredients that seem to contribute to happy and lasting marriages?
Well, open communication is essential. Being able to talk honestly with each other about your needs, your feelings, your concerns.
And being willing to compromise, to meet each other halfway, to find solutions that work for both of you.
And of course, respect. That's absolutely fundamental. Respect for each other's opinions, each other's values, each other's individuality.
It's about treating each other as equals, as partners.
Exactly. And so as you're thinking about all of this for yourself, maybe ask yourself what's most important to you. Is it that initial passionate connection, or is it that sense of stability and shared values that can come with an arranged marriage?
And if you're in a situation where you're in love but your family doesn't approve, maybe the key is to try to have those open and honest conversations, to really listen to each other and try to understand where everyone's coming from.
Yeah, and for anyone who's considering an arranged marriage, it's so important to take your time, get to know your potential partner, ask questions, be honest about your feelings. Don't feel pressured to rush into anything.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave you with one final thought. No matter how a marriage begins, it takes work. It takes effort from both partners.
Absolutely. And love, real love, isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. It's a commitment.
It's about showing up for each other day after day, even when things are tough.
That's what makes a marriage last. And ultimately, that's what brings true happiness.
So we hope this discussion has given you a lot to think about. Whether you believe in love marriage or arranged marriage or maybe somewhere in between, what matters most is that you find a path that leads you to a loving and fulfilling partnership.
And as you navigate that path, remember those key ingredients: respect, understanding, communication, and a whole lot of patience. Those are the foundations of any successful marriage.
And with that in mind, we'll leave you with one final question to ponder. We talked a lot about individual desires versus family influence. What do you think the future holds for these dynamics? How do you think the roles of love and family will continue to evolve in modern relationships? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.